Hi, everybody. This is Tim Smythe, and today we're going to learn about how to read a comic. This may sound like a simple lesson, but I've learned as a teacher of 20 years that a lot of students and adults have never picked up a comic book before. And so it's easy sometimes to get lost or to be intimidated because it is a little bit different. And we need to teach ourselves and our students how to read a comic book so that we understand what's going on, just like we would with any other piece of text in our classrooms. So today we're going to learn a little bit about the basics of how to read a comic. We're going to learn some sources where to find free comics that are online. Also discuss textual and visual references in comics. And this is so important. The images in comic books tell us so much about the story. We can't just read what's going on in the narrator box or in the dialogue, and we'll talk about that. We also have to take a look at body language. We have to take a look at facial expressions that add so much to the story. And that will help us in predicting, in skimming, and in scanning for information. The other thing I want to make sure we understand is a lot of times we use the words comics, comic books, and graphic novels. And sometimes there's some confusion over what those different words mean. So a comic and a comic book are the same thing. They is what's called sequential art. What that means is it's a collection of images put together in a certain order that tell a story. A graphic novel is the same thing as a comic book. It's just a bigger version. It's a full story. Usually, comic books themselves only tell one part of a story, and then you have to read the next one and the next one. Where graphic novels almost always tell the complete story. So these are some of the sources, and you can go to Comic Book Plus, and you'll see this website here. And this is where I pulled some of the images that I'll be showing you today from this website. And what's great is these comics are free to use, free to download, free to share. They are in the public domain, meaning that their copyright is open use that any one of us can use. So it's great to share with our students. And they also serve as artifacts. These comics tend to be from the early 1900s up until about the 1950s. They are in English, and they tell us about American society in the United States. Comic books, as any book or TV show or music or movie, pop culture is a time capsule. It's an artifact that tells us a lot about what's going on in that society. So I'm really excited to share these sources with you. You can also go to Digital Comic Museum, or you can also go to here, this link right here for this public domain for superheroes, which is a great resource as well. Of course, our panels and perspectives comic book, which is fantastic, that we'll be referring to many, many times throughout this course. In panels and perspectives, it is set up to show you how to read a comic book. Most comics will read in this Z pattern. So you want to start on the upper left-hand corner, go to the right, then come down to the left, over to the right, down to the left, over to the right. And so when we translate that from prose into a comic book or sequential art, it's the same pattern, this Z pattern. Don't get confused. Sometimes you may see a little bit of a different sized panel. It still follows the same format. So from left to right, up to down. Although sometimes that can change, and I'll show you some examples of that. The big thing to tell students, if you've never read a comic before, if you get a little bit lost, that's okay. Go back to where you were before and make sure you're following the right order. So, sequential reading or sequential art, as I've mentioned a few times. So, again, the basic idea is that you want to start up here at the upper left hand corner and go over to the right, down to the left. But sometimes these panels, they're not always going to be in square shapes. The artist can do a lot of different things with the panels. You also have to understand that right here, this is called the gutter. And in the gutter, there's a lot that happens from this panel to that panel, from this panel to this panel. So comic books really force us to imagine a lot of what's going on. When in a traditional prose book, the words will tell you what happens in a transition from this image to this image. So, really, it's a much deeper level of reading in a comic book than in a traditional prose book. You'll also often see these blocks. This is for the narrator to fill in information that we'll need. You'll also see, of course, these word bubbles. This is for the dialogue between the characters. So, again, as we're reading, we're going to start here, go to here, then down to here. So, you might maybe get a little confused here. Do I go here or do I go down to here? Again, no worries. If you get a little lost, just like you would in a prose book, go back to where you were and then go back in the other order and it'll make sense. So in this case, we're going to go from here to here, down to here, and we see here how the character has interacted with the gutter between the panels. And then we come over to here. In this, we'll see here, sometimes we're lucky enough that the illustrator will provide us with an actual arrow to show us what order to go in. So this, we have the narration, we have the narrator's voice here, and we see Albert Einstein, and he's teaching a lesson. And so we're going to go from here on the left to the right, over to the right, down to the left, but then where do you go? So the way we talked about is you would traditionally come over here to the right. However, the illustrator here has given us an arrow to tell us to go from this image down to this image, then we come over here. In this instance, when we're talking about a science experiment, this illustrator really showed us exactly what order he or she wants us to follow. So we start here, and then we follow this arrow through the gutter. We come over to here, we see the narration. Then we come down to here. Then we go diagonally over to here, and then we come over to here. And so that's the basic type of a thing that you'll see in comic books. Again, generally it tends to go left to right, up to down in that Z pattern. Sometimes you'll see what's called a splash page, and this is from Panels and Perspectives. So, a splash page is 2 pages in a comic book or a graphic novel that make up one image or one story. So, in here, we don't have any arrows to tell us in what order to go. There's a lot of information going on here. And as you read, if you were to start here, as we should, and read through the dialogue from the narrator, then you would come over to here to read. But you'll notice when you read Panels in Perspective, that's not actually the order of the words that actually are chronological. So in this case, if I'm reading here, I said, wait a minute, I'm a little lost here. Let's come back to here. And then we can kind of see this chronological approach. So we actually come down this way, then jump over to here, and then come down here. Although in a lot of cases in a splash page, you can read things out of order, you can look at images out of order, and you can make sense of these on your own. And that's where the artistic interpretation comes in to the sequential art. Just on the cover of a comic, there's so much that's going on. And so with my own students, I ask them, how do you know? When we annotate a text, when we take a look at a diary entry or a letter, we want students to answer questions with textual evidence. It's the same thing here with a comic book. How do you know what's going on? What questions do you have? And then how do you know? So I came up with a couple of sample questions. So we have this scene here. We have a lot of action going on. What's going to happen next? And that's a great activity to use with students. You can draw, what do you think is going to happen next, and have your students compare. So what's going to happen? What are these rabbits going to do? Is this bull going to hit this man? Is he going to run through his cape? Is he going to run into the audience? Is this girl going to warn everybody what's going on? We don't know. And so that leaves us up to interpretation. Any of those answers are fine as long as we're providing that visual evidence of what we actually see. You could ask, well, what does the audience not see? Well, they don't see the bull that's behind the cape. Maybe what's the economic status of the people in the audience? Are they wealthy? Are they, where are they? And so here, maybe I'm guessing, but I see a patch on his pants. So I'm going to guess that maybe he might be a little bit impoverished. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe he's very wealthy and likes to wear pants like that. But again, as long as I have that evidence, that's okay. Um, what's the setting of the comic book itself? So we see here a gate, perhaps from a farm. We see that there's a tree. We see that it's out in a field. What time of the day is it? So we can assume that it is a sunny day. It is during the daytime. We don't see any street lights or anything. So all that information and a lot more we can get just from the cover of the comic book. Again, here's another example. Here's the Silver Surfer from 1970. So when we take a look at this, what's going on? So it's not just the main characters. We want to take a look at the people in the background. So you can ask, how do these people feel? And I'm seeing this man here. His mouth is open. He looks frightened. The lady next to him is grabbing onto him for help. These folks here also look frightened. So that tells us a lot. Where does this take place? Well, we see a paved street, we see a sidewalk, and we see buildings. So this is some sort of a city or an urban setting. Then we can take a look at the characters here. And these lines show us that there's action going on. We see that the Silver Surfer is coming in from right to left. Who's going to win this battle? Why would you say that? Well, this character has Silver Surfer by the face. Maybe he's going to win, but Silver Surfer has the upper hand. Silver Surfer is also coming in at a lot of speed, and he also has, well, his silver surfboard. So there's a lot of things that we could discuss from this, just from the cover of the comic book. What do you think we're going to learn about when we read in the comic? What's the story going to be about? Speech bubbles, when we're reading inside of a comic book, also tell us a lot. So there's a lot of things that are going on here. This speech bubble looks like a cloud, and it has these little circles that lead up to it. This tends to be either when somebody is dreaming and they're asleep, or in this case, the character is relaxing and he's thinking to himself. However, this is juxtaposed with this image over here from the same comic from Zonk Volume 2. Um, we see here that this speech bubble has a lot of angles to it. It looks angry. And we see here that there's a lot of lines there's a lot of movement going on here. And so, same character, but here he's very relaxed and he's thinking to himself. And here he's yelling out loud. We see the exclamation points. We see the words in bold. We see the jagged edges. So, those simple things we really need to pay attention to because they tell us so much about the story. And with that, and we'll get more into this in later lessons, this is also from Zonk, Volume 2. Even without words, we can infer information just by the facial expression. So you can give the students a comic book with no words in it and have them debate, how do these characters feel? So you could take a comic that you already have and take the words out, or you could do a Google search for blank comic book pages or comic books without dialogue. And so we see here that, to me, and again, feel free to disagree, but to me, the evidence tells me that this character here is surprised. This character here is either angry or maybe it kind of looks like a crying baby too. So we don't know. And that's okay. So what words would you put in this dialogue box? And it could tell your own story and have your students debate. What do you think is happening here? So this was just a little bit about how to read a comic book. We'll talk more about this as we go on. The major message here is don't be intimidated. It's okay if your students get lost a little bit. Have them experience comic books, have them get used to it, have them go back and reread and take a look at the images, and it will all make sense. So I hope you enjoyed this. I very much enjoyed sharing it. Thank you so much and have a great day.